We've been learning about these really important, these most important bodhisattvas in Buddhism for a few weeks now, and these being beings, of course, who've even upon their own enlightenment, have chosen to stay in this world in which we live to relieve the suffering of all beings. And we talked about, most recently, Samantabhadra, the universal sage bodhisattva. You might also know him as universal worthy bodhisattva. And he's considered the model of the shining practice. And he's associated with action. He teaches us that wisdom really only exists for the sake of putting it into practice, and only in as much as it benefits all beings. And as I mentioned last week, we are still today affected by his wisdom, especially in the form of his very well-known 10 great vows of bodhisattvas, of which we here in the Zendo chant 4. And these vows are essential for walking the bodhisattva path. And they're essential for us to not leave this earth as long as there is suffering, to sincerely and wholeheartedly awaken to our own delusions, to recognize these delusions and grow from them, and to become as skillful and compassionate as the Buddha. Those are the vows we say sometimes here on Sunday mornings. So when we chant these lines, we're also paying homage to Samantabhadra, the shining practice bodhisattva. Where I'd like to take up today with my talk is with the Buddha's answer to Samantabhadra as recounted in the last chapter, number 28 of the Lotus Sutra. And having traveled to Eagle Peak to hear and listen directly to Shakyamuni Buddha, he asks him very pointedly, how will people be able to fulfill these teachings that you are giving, these teachings in what is going to be called the Lotus Sutra, upon your death, dear Lord Buddha? And the Buddha responds that one would need to meet 4 conditions. And the second, third, and fourth of them are actually plans of action, things we can actually do. Last week I discussed number 1 and number 2. Number 1 being protected and kept in mind by Buddhas, all Buddhas. And number 2, to plant roots of virtue, what we also refer to as roots of goodness in our lives. And the third condition that Buddha told him was to join those who are determined to be awakened. And I really feel that we can all recognize this one rather easily, I think. And this condition contains 2 parts: the joining with others and the determination to awaken. And the Lotus Sutra makes it very clear that the Buddhist path requires our own self-determination, our own commitment, and the support of others. Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And this determination is evident here with us, right? On Sundays and obviously at home, and we show up here, we meditate together, we meditate at home, we participate in retreats and workshops, and we read and so on. We do this, and we have this determination to awaken. And as we well know, awakening doesn't just happen. And it doesn't happen by accident. And it isn't easy, as the Lotus Sutra suggests, and as all of the Buddha's teachings allude to in general. You know, there's a chapter in the Lotus Sutra, chapter 7, that's called A Fantastic Castle City. And we're shown in this story that just having faith in this fantastic castle city that these followers are walking to, just having that faith is not enough. Rather, the path of the Bodhisattva towards awakening, our path is very arduous and it's very difficult, like in the story. And it requires us to work at it and to keep working at it endlessly. And you know, when someone, I don't know about you, but when someone learns of my practice or, you know, that I'm a priest, a Buddhist priest, I might receive comments about, oh, wow, it must be so nice to sit in meditation and be calm all the time. You know, getting my Zen on. And to be honest, you know, I'm somewhat dumbfounded as to what to say to them because, you know, what I want to do is say, hey, wait a minute. You know, this is really hard work. And it's, you know, continuous work, my whole life. And, you know, I feel that saying something like that sounds like I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself. You know, so I don't say that, but it's true, is it not? We've somehow come to this path and we've committed ourselves, and we do, you know, over and over again, we commit ourselves. And we take our aspiration to awaken very seriously. And so many of the teachings support this very self-determination. So, you know, I was thinking the other day about the first time that I read the Noble Eightfold Path, which is one of the Buddha's, you know, the first turning of the wheel. This is one of his first teachings. This idea of right, appropriate view, and intention, and speech, and action, and livelihood, and effort, and mindfulness, and meditation. You know, this is a tall order. Or perhaps we looked at the 6 paramitas, the 6 perfections of generosity, and morality, and patience, and diligence, and meditation, and wisdom again, and so on. It's a really tall order we've accepted, all of us. Not to mention our actual bodhisattva vows, to awaken with all beings, to end all of our delusions, to awaken from realizing them, and becoming the Buddha way. This is how I'd like to answer people, actually, who say, wow, it must be nice and stress-free. Our aspiration is immense. It's insurmountable, some might say. Just like that treacherous, arduous journey up the mountain path to the fantastic castle city, the fantastic castle city in the Lotus Sutra. And yet here we are, continuing to put one foot in front of the other, always doing more, not stopping. So in this sense, there is no immensity. There's just this. There's just this putting the foot in front of the other foot and being open to the world that unfolds between each step and simply not stopping. Because stopping might suggest, oh, I've had it. You know, I can't do this anymore. It might suggest that, but it also might suggest to some that they've arrived somewhere. Perhaps they might think, oh, I've got it. I've got it now, whatever the it is. But we know that anyone who is on the Bodhisattva path has always more to do. There's never an arrival. There is no end on this path of becoming. In fact, American Zen teacher, many of you know, Joko Beck, had a really good response to this idea of attaining enlightenment. And the story goes that one day, having finished a talk, she asked the Sangha if anyone had any questions. And a young man raised his hand right away, and he very bluntly and abruptly asked, "Are you enlightened?" And her response was, you know, immediate. And she started laughing, and she said, I hope I should never have such a thought. Or how about the Zen master, Iku, 15th century, who once said, I don't remember making a mistake called enlightenment. These stories mirror the Buddha path, the Buddha's path. He is sometimes referred to, in fact, the eternal Buddha Shakyamuni, because by his own admission, he had an extremely long life and had been practicing the Bodhisattva way, the way of helping others, for, in his words, or the translation of his words, a fantastically long time. And importantly, his words also, he's not yet finished. There's still a lot of work to do, and it requires of us to stay determined to be awakened. So let me remind us of this third condition the Buddha gave to Samantabhadra for receiving the teachings of the Lotus Sutra after the Buddha's death. The third condition is, again, to join those who are determined to be awakened. So, let's take a look at the importance of this first part, joining others. You know, on the surface, it's of course referring to a very basic truth, that it is much easier to walk this path, any spiritual path, I suppose, or to live this life if we do so among others who also do. But it goes far beyond this. You know, in Mahayana Buddhism, our liberation from our own attachments and our own bad habits, etc., and even our own salvation is dependent on others. And you'll remember, I think, that the Buddha created the first Sangha. The first group at that time was a group of monastics, of people who were close to him, people who were following him. He felt the need to do that. And doing this certainly reflected how important it was to him to have a community of people who had similar aspirations. So having a group, monastic or lay, to support each other on this path is fundamental to an individual's aspiration and work. In fact, there is a concept of admirable friendship in Sanskrit, it's Kalyanamita or Kalyanamitra. And it's applicable to both monastic and householder relationships, lay relationships, and it's very important. One involved in such a relationship is known as a good friend, a virtuous friend, a noble friend, or very often called an admirable friend. In fact, in the Pali Canon, which is the Theravadan set of teachings, in the Upadasutta, there's a conversation between Buddha and his disciple and cousin, Ananda, whom he loved very much, in which Ananda expresses his own realization of how important friendship, this Kalyanamittata, is in the spiritual life. And the story goes that Shakyamuni Buddha was staying among the Shakyas, that was his tribe, people, and he was in a small village, and Ananda was there with him. And one day, Ananda approached him, bowed to him, and sat down by his side, and then he said very enthusiastically to the Buddha, "This," meaning this, here in this place with these people, this is half of the holy life, Lord. Admirable friendship, admirable companionship, admirable camaraderie. And the Buddha immediately replied, "No, don't say that, Ananda, don't say that. Admirable friendship, admirable companionship, admirable camaraderie is actually the whole of the holy life. When a monk has admirable friends," he went on to say, friends, companions, and comrades, he can be expected to develop and pursue the Noble Eightfold Path. And additionally, the Buddha is said to have stated that through spiritual friendship with Buddha himself, followers have gained release from suffering. The Buddha recognized that without the support of other people, we won't make much spiritual progress. In fact, the support of others is indispensable. Our interdependency is vital to our own path, to our own awakening. And you know, we've heard the story of Buddha's enlightenment many times, sitting under the Bodhi tree. And yes, he sat under the tree alone and was enlightened. So perhaps can't very well take this moment, his moment of enlightenment, out of the context of his entire life, though. No doubt he had received spiritual instruction, maybe at home. And then after his going out of his home, he had at least 2 teachers that we know of. And after that, he had 5 companions with whom he practiced and wandered until shortly before his enlightenment. Community, no matter how small or large, has always been important to the Buddha. And so it is to us as well. So inherent in this third condition of joining those who are determined to awaken is the idea that we too should associate with those who have committed to following the Bodhisattva way as best as they can. However, we mustn't understand this to mean associate only with those who are like-minded. This interpretation would actually be contrary to what we know about the Bodhisattva path itself, about Buddha's teachings themselves. Our practice emphasizes our non-separation from all and any beings. The Buddha himself models an uncompromising compassion for others, and we're encouraged to be rooted in the very suffering and misery of this world, suffering no one, turning away from no one, including those in society those society may deem most undesirable or most despised. In fact, we're encouraged to actively be with and support these very people. And this brings us back to Samantabhadra's vows and his commitment. He teaches us that wisdom really only exists for the sake of putting it into practice. And it is only good insofar as it benefits all beings. It's not enough for us to have compassion or to study and then gain wisdom. We must also embody it in our lives. So on this path toward becoming a Buddha, we must be a bodhisattva for others, embodying Buddha nature by helping others in whatever ways may be appropriate for us and for them, helping others in whatever ways we ourselves can. One important way is by giving encouragement and strength to others, being Samantabhadra, being universal sage bodhisattva for others. We're going to take a few moments, and while we do, I'm going to ask Kate to put up a picture of this is a sculpture of Eagle Peak, Vulture Peak, we sometimes call it, in India, with the Buddha consoling Ananda. And we'll leave that up there while we take a moment.